Good evening, Weiss fans. So for some reason, my Unlimited Blade Works video actually did get 100 likes, so I guess I have to follow up now. You should all know the drill by now. It's going to be 4 cards from each color that I didn't cover in part 1, and I found interesting for one reason or another. I really kind of don't want to do a follow-up on this, but if you guys really want to see it, I'll go ahead and set the bar at 200 likes. If you guys give me 200 likes, then I guess I'll try to figure out a way to do 16 more cards. And without further ado, let's just hop right in. Really quickly, I want to get out of the way that I'm using new card images, and these ones are a lot bigger, so I should be able to get all the text in there without taking up like 90% of the picture like I used to. To kind of counterbalance this, because I don't know if the words are going to be big enough or small enough or whatever, I'm also going to be going back to the old format where I have a picture of the card on the left and I have a zoomed in version of the text on the right. I don't know if I'll stick with this forever because I'm super lazy, but if I go back and rewatch the video and I notice that I can't really read anything on the card image on the left, then I'll just keep doing it like this from now on. So about the actual card, we're looking at Mitsuzuri. Her first effect is if there's a marker under this card, it gains plus 3,500 power, meaning that this card naturally goes up to 12,000 base, which is ridiculously good. So the question becomes, how do we get one of these markers? Well, when it comes into play, if you discard a card from your hand to the waiting room and send this to memory, then at the start of your next draw phase, you can take this card, put it back in any slot of the stage, and put the top card of your deck under this character as a marker. So you do have that one turn where you don't actually get to use this card because it's been removed from the game, but it's kind of worth it to get a natural 12,000, okay? That's before any boosts or anything. Just 12,000 power is ridiculous. Taiga's a really interesting card. She's really weak, but she is also free. And when she comes into play, you can discard the top card of your opponent's stock, and then choose one card in their waiting room and put it in their stock. This is kind of not as good as some of the other strategies that Yellow has, because obviously if you do this, you can start putting a bunch of their climaxes into their stock, or a bunch of their change targets, or pretty much like if your opponent is relying on change, or if your opponent has any climaxes, you can use this to start loading up their stock. But at the same time, if they can spend their stock, then it's not really a big deal at all. I'd say that the best way to take advantage of this is to use cards that let you bounce this back to your hand. Like there's a Saber that came out. I probably should have gotten that to preview too, but there's a Saber that came out that lets you bounce one character back to your hand when she comes into play. And if you just do this multiple times, just load up that stock with a bunch of climaxes and change targets, then it could be good times. Shiro, Steel to fight alongside, is sort of a weaker version of the Rin that we looked at last time. He gives all of your master characters Encore, and it's the one where you clock yourself. And his second effect is when you put this card in play, you can pay 2 and search your deck for 1 Saber's Master Shiro and put it in your hand. Personally, I don't think the Saber's Master Shiro is a very good card, so I didn't get it to look at, but that first effect is really good if you, for some reason, don't want to run the Rin. Finally, I want to look at this event card. Look at the top 4 cards of your library and search for up to 1 weapon character, reveal it, and put it in your hand, then put the rest in the waiting room. Choose one of your characters, and that character gets plus 4,000 power for the turn. I think this is a pretty darn good card for a card that doesn't cost any stock. Some of my more eagle-eyed viewers have probably noticed that the downside of this card is it becomes damage in your clock after you're done using it. I do understand why this is bad, but I think for everything you're getting, and for the fact that it doesn't cost any stock, it's a pretty good effect. We're going to get started with red using Archer's Cynic. When it comes into play, you can pay 1 stock and have one of your opponent's front row characters lose 1,000 power. This can be really helpful during levels 1 and 2 when there's a huge power sort of mash where pretty much if you're playing things like the 7,000 vanillas and stuff, you can sort of make a power differential and reverse characters you wouldn't normally be able to, and 1 stock is not bad. If you just play this card and have it attack an open slot and then just pay the 1 stock to make it so that you can reverse something else, I personally think that this is not a bad staple card at all. It does also bond with Rin Cursed Gander, I guess that's how you pronounce it. It might be a typo, I don't know. But if I remember correctly, it's not a very good card, so I wouldn't worry about its bond. Its first effect is really where it's at. Archer Proof of Pact is a very simple card. It's pretty much like a 7,000 vanilla, but it's 7,500 instead. Some of you are looking at it like, oh no, you only get that 1,000 power boost if all of your other characters are either master and or servants. Well, I don't know if anybody's told you this or not, but all of the characters in the Fate Stay Unlimited Blade Works thing are either servants or masters. It's that simple. This card is pretty much always going to be a 7500 unless you happen to be fighting a deck that takes away traits, which is really rare. Okay, guys, I promise. It's super rare. And even if that does happen, it's still a 6500, which is not that bad. The last Archer card we're going to look at is a backup. It gives 2500 on level 2, but it has a Resonate effect. And I wanted to look at something else that had Resonate with the Rin Proof of Pact to show just how important the Rin Proof of Pact decks are going to be. When you use Archer Surprise Attack, you can reveal Rin Proof of Pact from your hand, and then choose one of your characters and give it plus 1000 power for the turn. The great thing about this is not only does it give you the option to give 3500, whereas normally you'd only be able to get 3000, but you can take 1000 of that and split it to another character that would otherwise not be as powerful. Granted, on level 2, 1000 power isn't quite as important as it is at the earlier levels, but it's not bad either. The last card in red we'll look at is Rin Day of Date, and I really only want to look at this card because it's got an adorable picture, and that's it. I'm kidding, obviously. When this is placed from hand to stage, draw up to 2 cards, discard a card from your hand to the waiting room. It's pretty basic red. When this is placed from hand to stage, rest one of your standing characters with either Master and or Servant. That's admittedly kind of bad. Like, this isn't so powerful that you need to actually nerf yourself in order to play it, but whatever. Let's take a look at its final effect. When this attacks, if Tosaka's Magic Seal is in the climax zone, you can pay the cost, which is 2 stock. If you do, deal X damage to your opponent, where X equals the number of climax cards in your waiting room. This is obviously a very awesome card to have at level 3. A lot of the level 3 cards in Fate Unlimited Blade Works have some kind of double attack feature, and this is a really good one. I wouldn't say it's as good as Sabers or Archers, but it is very decent. When it attacks, if you have its climax, you can deal up to 8 extra damage on top of your regular attack. People are going to argue, oh no, you don't want to deal that much damage. But, I mean, come on. If it's a free effect, you kind of do. Either you're going to get your attack through, and it's just going to be a whole bunch of damage at once, more than your opponent is willing to handle, or if it doesn't go through and it gets climax cancelled, then your actual attack is going to go through a lot easier. Plus, what are the odds you're actually going to do 8 damage? I mean, come on now. At most, I would guess that you're probably going to have somewhere between 3 and 5, and that is a very solid number. You could easily deal that damage. So green's got like nothing left. They only got like 10 to 12 new cards anyway, and most of them are pretty bad, but I'm going to do my best here. First we'll look at Shinji, Overly Self-Conscious. I really like this card just because of how funny it is. You can pay 1 at the start of your opponent's attack phase to move this to the back row to guarantee you have an attacker next turn. This has some pretty good applications, I would say. Paying 1 over and over again is obviously pretty bad, plus you eventually want to fill up your back row with actual back row characters. But the first few turns of the game, if you just have this out in the front row, attack, get a stock, and then during your opponent's turn move it to the back row so it doesn't die, it's great, and especially since it happens during the attack phase, so you can wait and see whether or not your opponent's actually going to try to attack into it. If your opponent's not going to attack into it, you don't even need to do it. But if your opponent is going to attack into it, you can just move this to the back, let your opponent have the attack, and then move it back to the front row during your turn and be guaranteed another attacker. Next we'll look at Lancer Bystander. In any other situation I would say this is kind of a bad card, but like we don't have much to work with here in green, so let's just take a look at it anyway. If you have 5 or more cards in your stock, this gets plus 1000 power and Super Encore. That's great and all. I mean, any card with Super Encore is good automatically, but it's got the same power as like an 8500 vanilla with the Super Encore, so I guess that makes it good. I guess. Next we'll look at Rider, Bewitching Beauty. When this attacks, if its climax is in play, then you can totally put one of your other characters from the stage to the waiting room, and then you can take a card out of your clock, put it in your hand, and put the top card of your deck into your clock. I guess it's kind of useful. I mean, like, if you had to clock something, or if you took something as damage that you really need for setup, like if you're setting up a change or something, then you could use this to get that back, and but then you could also hit a climax and have a climax in your clock. Yeah, just forget it, okay? Just forget it. I'm done trying to make these cards look good. In fact, I only added this last card so that I could rant about how effing awful it is. Shinji, Vice President of Bowmanship Club. It has experience, which is something that I really like. Okay, experience is a really cool concept, but this one, it only does it with Shinji overly self-conscious, which is the other card we looked at, which is okay. And for every one in your level zone, this gets plus 3,000 power. Alright, so let's break it down real quick. So you can't play it at level 0 because it's not a level 0. At level 1, if you happened to put one Shinji overly self-conscious in your level, then this is a 5,000, which means it's worse than the 5,500s. At level 2, if you have two of the Shinji overly self-consciouses, then this is 8,000, which is worse than the 8,500 vanillas. Now let's say it's level 3 and you manage to use every single level to level up with Shinji overly self-conscious. You have yourself an 11,000. Admittedly, an 11,000 for free is decent enough, but it's not going to win you any games, okay? You wasted the entire game to get this 11,000 on the field. And if your opponent has any sense whatsoever, they're just going to run over it immediately. It doesn't have any form of encore to protect itself or anything. And some people are going to argue, oh, well, there are ways you can give it encore. It's still not that good. With all of the good level 3 plays out there, especially for limited blade works, you don't need to do this at all, okay? This is so bad. You could get any other level 3 and do it way better. Kicking off blue, we'll start by looking at Heroic Spirit Assassin. During your opponent's turn, it becomes a 4,500 if you have it in the front row center slot, which is arguably good. People are going to argue that it's not good because your opponent can just side attack, and since it's level 0, there's not really a penalty for it. But at the same time, if they can't destroy this, 4,500 being a lot to deal with at level 0, then this is a guaranteed attacker every turn, and you can sort of flip that, where if your opponent is side attacking you, you also have the ability to side attack them and just keep doing it that way. Or you can move this over to the side real quick, lose the 4,500, and then just play around it. It's a really good card because it'll stay alive long enough for you to just continuously generate stock off of it, and I think that's a pretty good trade-off. So, Noble Phantasm of Rule-Breaking Caster is sort of what I was talking about before, where you can totally take one trait away from your opponent's side of the field if you attack while it has its climax in play. So, if you have its climax in play, the way it works is you choose one trait on your opponent's side of the field, like Servant or Master, and you just take it away from all of your opponent's characters. This could be a really decent counter, every deck seems to have some kind of trait that it plays off of, you have Avatar for Sword Art Online, you have Magic for Madoka, you have that kind of thing that you can sort of just take away from your opponent altogether and not have to deal with it. One really good example is the Shiro we looked at earlier, which gives all of your masters a form of Super Encore. Well, if you take Master away from everybody, then that form of Super Encore is also gone. This also has 6,500 at level 1 for one stock. Obviously, I could just say, oh, but you could just have 7,000. But I really do think its effect, if you're going to play around it, makes it something that you can actually run. It makes it worth it to give up that 500 power to have the ability to just take away one trait from your opponent's side of the field if it's giving them too much of an advantage. This next event card we're going to look at is pretty great. A lot of people aren't going to see it that way, but I personally think it might be one of the most powerful event cards that have come out in the last couple of years. And here's why. All players return all cards in their waiting room to their respective decks and shuffle those decks. This has a couple of uses. Its main use is going to be if you've just kept climax canceling and you're running out of climaxes, then you can just shuffle all those climaxes back into your deck, and you have a better chance of climax canceling because you're not going to get completely screwed. So that out of the way, it has another use that I think is very powerful. a lot of decks are relying on change right now, and a lot of change targets are in the waiting room. So if you're fighting a deck like Modica, for example, and your opponent has changers and they have change targets in their waiting room, you can completely take away the entire change strategy altogether. You can just go here, and now you don't have a change deck. I think that's really powerful. Besides, you can start doing it as early as level 1, and it doesn't cost any stock. Overall, I think this is a really good event to run at least like 2 or 3 if you're running a blue deck, because it's just got so many good applications and not that many downsides. If you can get your opponent to shuffle their deck, maybe not counter, but maybe pair this with the Taiga we looked at earlier to put some of your opponent's climaxes into their stock and then make them shuffle their deck without those climaxes in it, I think things like that are really good. I think this card has enough applications that you should consider running it if you are running a blue deck, regardless of what kind of deck it is. The last card we're going to look at today is Soichiro Kuzaki, the Quiet Teacher. Its effect is, well, it's a backup, first of all. Let's talk about that real quick. It's a 2500 backup, kind of like the card we looked at before, and this one has a special effect too. You can put one Caster's Master Soichiro Kuzaki from your hand into the clock when you use this card's backup, and if you do, you can take one of your opponent's characters whose level is higher than their actual level and just straight put it on the bottom of their deck to become damage later. This one is way more situational than the other one because the other one gave you another 1000 power, which is always good, whereas this is only really good if you're fighting against change decks, okay? If you are fighting against a change deck and you weren't able to pull off your illusion magic before, then your opponent pulls off, like, let's say you're fighting against a Modica deck and they happen to get like a Homura level 2 on the field or a Mami level 2 on the field if they're awesome and they're running my Homura Mami deck that I made when I first got started. Okay, hypothetically speaking, of course. If your opponent's running some kind of change deck like that, then you can use this and just go and your change deck's done. You can get rid of their changer, they can put it on the bottom of their deck, and it just becomes damage later. That's it. The one thing that I kind of hate about this card is the fact that it's a level 2. If this were a level 1, I feel like it would have a lot more relevance and be a lot easier to recommend to people. But as it stands, level 2, you're only really dealing with the level 3 changers, or you're dealing with the level 2 changers that came out on level 1 and leveled you up to level 2. But by that point, you can just kind of deal with it. I don't know. I just think this is a really interesting idea for a card, but I do wish that it came out one level earlier. That's pretty much all I have to say on Unlimited Blade Works, so if you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. Those things really do help us out. Leave me your thoughts on the set in the comments section below, along with any suggestions for future videos. And finally, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudo news. Remember, if you for some reason want to see 16 more cards from the Fate set, you can totally leave this a like, and if I happen to hit 200, I'll do a follow-up video, although I'll warn you, it's gonna be a little bit sparse or just me making fun of some of the bad cards. I'll catch you later, Weiss fans.